Mademoiselle Berthe and Her Lover by Georges Simenon. Part 1. Monsieur Commissioner, I understand, believe me, that I am being quite bold in disturbing your peace. I am all the more aware of it because I have heard so much about your charming little house on the banks of the Loire. But will you not forgive me when I tell you that for me, this is a matter of life and death? I am alone in the vastness of Paris. The crowd swirls around me, and like any other girl, I am always on the move. Yet at any second, tragedy could strike, a bullet fired from God knows where, or perhaps a knife in the back. The crowd will watch me fall. My body will be carried into some pharmacy before being sent to the morgue. And in the end, the papers will write only a few lines, if they deign to mention it at all. Despite everything, Monsieur Commissioner, I want to live. Do you understand? I am young. I am determined. I drink in all the joys of existence. Doubtless, you will be surprised to receive this letter in your secluded retreat, an address so difficult to discover. Let it be known to you that I am the niece of a man who was your longtime colleague in the criminal police and who died before your very eyes shortly before you retired. I implore you, Monsieur Commissioner, answer my call. Sacrifice a few days or even a few hours for my sake. This request comes from the bottom of a young woman's heart, a woman who is on her knees before you because she does not want to die. On Tuesday and Wednesday at 10 o'clock in the morning, I shall be on the terrace of the Café de Madrid. I will be wearing a small red hat. If you come, I shall recognize you, for I have a photograph of you standing beside my uncle. SOS. 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 Maigret was cross. First, because whenever he found himself settling into a quiet life, he was invariably seized by a sense of irritation at the fact. Second, for reasons he couldn't quite explain, he had chosen not to tell his wife about the letter, and he now felt a twinge of shame for having to invent a pretext for his trip to Paris. Third, the sheer haste with which he had set off for the appointment proved that he wasn't quite as happy in his garden as he tried to make himself and others believe. Like a rank amateur, he had pounced on the very first mystery that came his way. Finally, as so often happens in life, there was a truly ridiculous reason for his anger. When he had left Mung-sur-Loire at 7 in the morning, a bone-chilling mist hung over the valley, and Maigret had donned his heavy winter overcoat. Now, as he sat on the terrace of the Café de Madrid, a brilliant May sun bathed the boulevards, where everyone else was strolling about in the lightest of spring clothes. To begin with, he mused, the letter is far too literary to be sincere. As for the colleague killed before my eyes, that could only be Sergeant Lucas, but he never mentioned a niece to me. The terrace was nearly deserted. He sat alone at a table, and since he had already had a cup of coffee at the Gare de Lens, he ordered a beer. It would serve me right, he thought, if she doesn't show up at all, and I can catch the 11 o'clock train back home. At the exact moment the hands of the electric clock at the nearby intersection struck 10, a flash of red appeared in the crowd. A minute later, a somewhat plump young woman was sitting beside Maigret. He noticed immediately that she was breathless. "Forgive me," she gasped, pressing a hand to the left side of her chest, where her heart must have been pounding wildly. "I'm always so frightened," she added, trying to manage a smile. "But from the moment you arrived, the fear has vanished. I promise you, I shall be brave." It all took only a few seconds, and Maigret could not stop marveling at the fact that he was sitting next to this tiny, living creature whose trembling fingers nervously toyed with a crocodile skin handbag. As the waiter was watching them, he asked, "What will you have to drink?" "Something strong, if you please." "A cognac?" "I think so. I never doubted you would come, but I was terrified to think you might not arrive in time. Are you Lucas's niece? Yes. I thought you would realize his great niece, actually. I didn't give you my name or address only out of fear that the post. Suddenly, her gaze locked onto something, or rather, someone. A young man had just taken a seat at a table a short distance away. Maigret caught the flicker of alarm in her eyes and grunted. Is that him? Who? That fellow over there. She composed herself instantly and smiled. No, you're mistaken. It's just that whenever a man appears, especially one in a beige raincoat, I flinch in spite of myself. Maigret noticed that instead of draining her glass in one gulp, she merely wetted her lips with the cognac. He did not miss the ironic, slightly contemptuous look from the waiter, and he realized he had been cast in the role of a gentleman of uncertain age, a lover of fresh youth. My name is Berthe, the girl continued, evidently disliking silence. I'm 28 years old. Now that you have agreed to take my case, I am ready to tell you everything. Her red hat made her as radiant as the spring day, yet there was a tangible air of confidence about her, the air of a woman who knows exactly what she wants. For you have agreed, haven't you, Monsieur Commissioner? I know nothing of your story yet. You will. You will know everything. From now on, you will relieve me of my anxiety. Was the presence of the young man in the raincoat truly rattling her? She kept glancing around. Her eyes followed the passers-by, returned to Maigret, shifted to the glass of cognac, and then to the young man, all while she struggled to keep smiling. Would it be too much trouble to come my place? I live nearby, Rue Caulaincourt in Montmartre. A taxi will get us there very quickly. And Maigret, still wearing a scowl because the whole situation felt absurd, tossed a coin onto the table. As they left the terrace, he noticed that the young man in the beige raincoat was, in turn, calling for the waiter. It was number 67A, tucked away near the place Constantine Piqueur, between a bakery and a coal merchant's shop. It was a house much like any other in Montmartre, with a porter's lodge near the front door, a worn reddish carpet on the stairs, faux marble yellowed walls, and 2 doors with brass handles on every floor. I'm so sorry to make you climb all this way. It's at the very top, on the 5th floor, and we have no lift. As she stepped onto the mat and pulled a key from her handbag, everything changed as if by magic. The spring of the grand boulevards suddenly seemed pale and tasteless compared to the spring that greeted the eye in this dwelling, perched high above the rooftops of Paris. From this height, Rue Caulaincourt, with its buses and trucks, looked like a dark river, and one felt a pang of pity for those trapped so far below, away from the air and the sun. A glass door led out to a long, iron balcony. All along its length, geraniums seemed to bleed into the light, and a canary hopped in a cage where a few sprigs of chickweed remained from the morning. Take off your things, Monsieur Commissioner. Will you allow me a moment to freshen up? I dressed in such a hurry, agonizing over whether you would actually come. With all the doors standing open, the entire apartment was visible. It consisted of 3 rooms, quite charmingly furnished and meticulously kept, filled with light fabrics that made the place feel even more alive. Mademoiselle Berthe slipped off her suit jacket, revealing a tight-fitting yellow blouse patterned with tiny flowers. Give me your coat. Sit down, please. I hardly know where I am. I am so happy. Believe me, I feel as though the nightmare is finally over. Indeed, joy radiated from her face. Her moist eyes sparkled, and her plump pink lips parted in a smile. You'll see. I don't know where to begin, but it doesn't matter, does it? You're used to this. You only had to see this room with the sewing machine and the scraps of fabric to guess that I'm a dressmaker. I'll tell you even more. I mostly sew dresses that my clients, very respectable ladies, mind you, ask me to copy for models they bring me from the big fashion houses. You won't turn me in, will you? She radiated so much energy that there was no time for reflection. One could barely keep up with her expressions. Maigret felt a familiar sense of embarrassment, finding himself immersed in this atmosphere of youth and femininity like a wayward married man. Now, I must make a more serious confession. I'm ashamed, but there's no other way. I could never have told this to Uncle Lucas. You see, Commissioner, I'm not exactly a proper girl. I have, or rather I had a boyfriend, and it's because of him. Maigret's embarrassment turned to flat disappointment. How naive he had been to believe, even for a moment, that this was a serious case, when it was merely the story of a romantic girl threatened by a lover hoping to win her back. She prattled on. I met him last summer in St. Malo, where I was spending my holidays. He's a young man from a good family, the son of an industrialist who was forced into bankruptcy. As a rich child, he was pampered all his life, but suddenly, at 23, he had to start working. What did he do? Maigret asked tentatively. In St. Malo, he sold cars for a large garage, or rather, he tried to sell them, as business was poor. And Albert, his name is Albert, doesn't like to bother people. Shortly after I returned to Paris, he followed me here and began looking for a job. Pardon me, did he live here? Maigret glanced at the open bedroom door, noting a mirrored wardrobe and a highly polished parquet floor. No, she said. I didn't want that. He rented a small room in a hotel on Rue Lepic. He came over often, but only during the day. Was he your lover? She blushed, nodded, and stood up, asking Maigret if he would like a glass of wine. I only have white, a sweet Bordeaux. I don't even know where I put it. I hardly know how I'm living. Listen, let me summarize everything quickly, because I feel I'm getting worked up again. I was wrong about Albert. You see, I realized quite soon that he wasn't really looking for work, and that he spent most of his time in shady bars. Several times, I saw him shaking hands with very dark characters. You understand what I mean? She paced back and forth, her voice low and muffled. It was clear she was on the verge of tears. A week ago, something happened. You read about it in the papers, though you might not have given it much thought. In the middle of the night, four young men rob a radio shop on Boulevard Beaumarchais. They weren't interested in the bulky equipment, but the cash. Heaven only knows how they found out there was money in the till. They made off with 60,000 francs. As they were fleeing, the police spotted them. One of the young men fired a shot and killed an officer. Suddenly, Maigret regained his stature. It was as if his silhouette became heavier, his gaze harder. Mechanically, he lit his pipe, which until then he hadn't dared to take out of his pocket. And then, he asked, his voice sounding like that of a stranger to Mademoiselle Berthe. Two of the thieves were arrested. Two characters well known to the police, one called Pockmark, the other the Marseillaise. Both young, practically beginners. Their headquarters was near the Place Blanche, which Albert used to frequent. Who fired the shot? Maigret asked, staring intently at the canary through the tobacco smoke. No one knows. Or rather, a revolver was found on the pavement, and it belongs to Albert. It was all too easy to prove, since he'd taken the gun from his father, and his name was engraved on it. When his father found out from the papers, he came forward. He was questioned at the Quai d'Orfèvres. And Albert, he's being hunted. You know better than I do how these things work. I assume his description has been sent everywhere. That's why. She wiped her eyes and stepped out onto the balcony for a moment, her back to Maigret. He saw her shoulders heave as if with sobs. When she returned, she looked pale and haggard. I could have told the truth to the police, but I was afraid. I trust you, Monsieur Maigret, because I know you won't betray me. Here. She opened a Rouen-style porcelain soup tureen sitting on the sideboard and, pulling out a letter, handed it to Maigret. He read the uneven handwriting in purple ink. My little Berthe, as you will see from this letter, I am in Calais. I need to cross the border as soon as possible. I have decided not to leave without you. So, I am waiting for you. You only need to place the following ad in Lintron. Albert, on such and such a day, at such and such an hour, and I will be waiting at the Calais station. I must warn you at once. If you show this letter to the spies, I will find a way to avenge myself. What I did for you. Therefore, you understand where your duty lies. I hold you responsible for everything that may happen to me. I also warn you that I would sooner prevent you from belonging to another than leave this world alone. If you want to understand, you will. You're Albert. Why didn't you go to Calais? Maigret asked, his voice deceptively naive. Because I have no desire to be the wife or the mistress of a murderer. I thought I loved Albert. I took him for an honest young man who had fallen on hard times. I helped him as much as I could. Her lower lip trembled. In another moment, she would be in floods of tears. Now I know that he only cared, and still cares, about my money, because he knows I have savings. I have over 15,000 francs in the savings bank. Tears spilled from her eyes. He never loved me, don't you see? And I am suffering so much. I'm afraid. I don't want to go there. The very thought that he... Maigret rose clumsily and patted Mademoiselle Berthe on the shoulder. She leaned her elbows on the table and wept, burying her face in her hands. Soon, however, her fear turned to indignation. The police came to question me. They nearly took me in as an accomplice. I didn't tell them about the letter. If I had, they would have never let me go. I'm sure of it. I am terrified. I am certain he will come back from there and bring me nothing but trouble. Once, when the cat rubbed against Albert's legs, he kicked it away so cruelly that the poor creature was left lame for life. I would have done anything for him. If you had seen him, you would have thought, just as I did, that he was... Do you truly not know the young man who was sitting near us on the café terrace? Maigret interrupted. I swear it. How curious. Why? He stepped onto the balcony, which overlooked the place Constantine Piqueur. There, right at the corner of Rue Caulaincourt, he spotted the famous beige raincoat pacing back and forth. I don't know. I'm thinking. What are you thinking? Tell me. Calm me down. Promise me, Monsieur Commissioner, that you will protect me. I need to know where Albert is hiding. If only I were sure he had crossed the border. And what would you do then? He grunted. I would breathe more freely. Otherwise, I feel he will kill me because he... Maigret stood surrounded by the quintessence of that small Montmartre world. A world that works bravely, content with life's modest joys. On the kitchen table lay a chop intended for lunch, a cardboard box of celery remoulade bought from the dairy, and a blue earthenware plate with a heart stewed in cream. By the sewing machine was an unfinished dress, an organdy evening gown strewn with spring bouquets. In a porcelain cup sat pins, buttons, a pencil, chalks, and a few stamps. In short, a private life illuminated by this balcony suspended over the city. Mademoiselle Berthe sobbed, showing a red nose and tear-streaked cheeks without a trace of vanity. I know I'm being tactless, speaking of things only as I understand them. Nevertheless, if you don't help me, I have no doubt you'll be identifying me in the morgue in a few days. He was my first lover, Monsieur Commissioner. Until now, I lived a respectable life, whether you believe me or not. I wanted to get married, to have children, especially to have children. And now, I'll see to it that you do. Maigret promised awkwardly, for he had always loathed emotional outbursts. Before he could finish, she seized his hand and kissed it. Thank you, Commissioner. But tell me one more thing. I'm not a monster, am I? I loved him, I'm not lying. But the one I loved was the honest youth I saw in him. I didn't betray him for the sake of betrayal. The proof is that I didn't go to the police. You're different. I called you to protect me, because I am afraid because I am too young to die. He moved away from her again and stood on the balcony with his back turned, tobacco smoke forming a halo around his head. What do you intend to do? She continued. Of course, I will pay the expenses. I am not rich, but as I told you, I have a little money. That house directly opposite. Is it a hotel by any chance? Yes, the Hotel Concarneau. Excellent. I might stay there. Here is some good advice. Leave the house as little as possible. I won't go out at all if you wish, except for groceries. Couldn't you have the concierge do that for you? I'll ask her. I'll come and see you this evening. It's a pity you don't know that young man. Which young man? The one who followed you to the Café de Madrid and who is keeping watch at the corner. Unless, she began, her eyes widening. Unless he is an accomplice of Albert's. Suppose that instead of coming himself, he sent one of his friends. Until later, Maigret grunted, heading for the door. He was dissatisfied, though he couldn't have said why. On the landing, he brushed a white thread from his sleeve. As he descended the stairs, he kept asking himself what he was going to do next. Seeing the commissioner, the young man in the raincoat ducked into a bistro at the corner of the square. Maigret followed him inside, ordered a large beer, and noting that the telephone booth was right in the main room, he stepped inside, intentionally leaving the door ajar. Hello, criminal police? Inspector Lacroix, please. Yes, Jerome Lacroix. It's his Uncle Maigret. Hello. Is it you, son? How's it going? What? Never mind that. Your business can wait. Jump in a taxi and come meet me at Rue Caulaincourt. Just a moment. He leaned out of the booth and asked the proprietor, What's the name of this place? The Zanzibar. He picked up the receiver again. To the Zanzibar? Yes. I'll be waiting. No. Your aunt is as fit as the Pont-Neuf. So am I. See you soon. Returning to the bar, he noticed ironic glints in the gray eyes of the youth, who was dressed in a light suit, iridescent shoes, and a snakeskin belt. Fancy a game of bone poker? The youth offered the proprietor. No time. And you, monsieur? A game of poker? Maigret hesitated, then finally snatched up the dice cup with a gesture so menacing it was as if he were already snapping handcuffs onto his opponent. Part 2. He rolled 2 9s and a 10. Then, as he gathered the dice to roll again, he asked, So, you know me then? The country must know its heroes. Mustn't it? The youth sang out sweetly. 3 jacks. Do you fold? And what are you drinking? I trust they didn't offer you anything decent up there, except perhaps that cloying wine that tastes like currant syrup. In a situation like this, there was nothing to do but keep one's cool, and above all, not show any irritation. Maigret continued to puff at his pipe in short draws, taking an old match as a marker, while his partner, with an angelic expression, revealed 3 queens. Do you really not remember me? And to think you once interrogated me from 9 at night until 5 in the morning. The boy was becoming more and more cheerful. He had a charming face, and he knew it. But more importantly, he could smile with such simple-hearted innocence when he chose to that it was difficult to remain truly angry with him. The cocaine business. Hasn't it clicked yet? A few years ago, I was a delivery boy at the Celly on Rue Caulaincourt, and you were absolutely determined to beat a confession out of me. 3 kings twice over. Magnificent. Well, 2 nines. Pass me a match. Ordering an aperitif with the same carefree, joyous air, he went on the attack. So, what do you make of the little lady? The bistro was nearly empty. Only one drunkard stubbornly battled a slot machine, while the proprietor took advantage of the lull to pour a glass of dregs for himself. You should have clocked the game from the first minute, shouldn't you? It had been more than 4 years since Maigret had heard that particular brand of underworld slang, and he felt a sudden, almost traitorous urge to smile, the way an exile might feel upon meeting a fellow countryman. With all due respect, and just between us, I hope you haven't let yourself be strung along. Maigret needed to let him talk. To buy time, he either sipped his beer or busied himself knocking out his pipe and tamping in fresh tobacco. I figured she'd pull a stunt any day now, the boy continued. You can see those fits coming a mile off. But I never imagined she'd trouble a big fish like you. Careful now, Monsieur Maigret. You're mistaking a queen for a jack. 4 jacks. Do you fold? He rattled the dice. 4 kings. You're having no luck today. But to finish with the lady, it's not really her fault she's a bit peculiar, as they say. Even as a child, she was treated for sleepwalking. He glanced toward the door and exclaimed, Well, look at that. Here comes your colleague. Best if I leave the 2 of you to it. He slipped away just as Jerome Lacroix stepped out of a taxi and entered the bistro. The 2 men eyed each other warily, the young rogue still wearing his disarming smile, while the detective from the Quai d'Orfèvres knit his brows in a dark scowl. Hello, uncle. What was that type doing here? Who is he? Baby Louis. You must have known him when he was a runner for the Montmartre nightclubs. The kind of type who thinks he's a comedian. The kind I'll catch red-handed sooner or later. Jerome Lacroix, who had entered the criminal police through Maigret's recommendation, was a tall, gangly youth with thick hair and a stubborn streak. He had a long nose, small eyes, and enormous hands and feet. He was considered somber and persistent, a man who would sooner let himself be torn to pieces than neglect the smallest grain of his duty. Sit down here in the corner, son, Maigret said, choosing a table from which he could see number 67A. Are you acquainted with his sister? Whose sister? Baby Louis's? As it happens, I was just at her place the other day. Maigret didn't show it, but the news did not please him. Are we talking about Mademoiselle Berthe? Yes, the dressmaker across the street. Is Annie doing well? You already asked me that on the phone. Right. My apologies. What is the story with this Mademoiselle Berthe? Maigret noted with some satisfaction that his nephew struggled to find an answer. She's a dressmaker. You just said that. She's the mistress of one Albert Marcinelle, whom we're hunting for the murder of a police sergeant on Boulevard Beaumarchais. Is that all? Honest to God, that's all I've been able to fish up. She leads a very quiet life. The reports from the concierge are excellent. Aside from this Albert, she never has men over, not even her brother, whom she kicked out once and for all. But surely you didn't come to Paris just for her. On the contrary, a surprised Jerome began to reflect, staring into his glass. He couldn't fathom how this story could interest his uncle, a man who usually refused to trouble himself with even far more serious matters. In my opinion, we'll nab him any day now, and that'll be the end of it. A hardened scoundrel, not worth the time. We've sent his description everywhere, and I'd be surprised if, You ought to place an ad in Lintron. Jerome understood less and less. An ad to find him. Write down the text. Albert, Wednesday, 3:17. See to it that there's a policeman at the Calais station at that time. If our Albert is there. Is that all? That's all. Do you think he'll be there? I'd bet 10 to 1 he won't. And then nothing. Give my love to your wife and the boy. And of course, if anything new crops up, it would be kind of you to call me at the Hotel Concarneau. It's 3 doors down. Goodbye, Uncle. Maigret paid the check. He felt far more confident than he had that morning. It seemed the case had finally caught its momentum. In short, his impression was this. On one side, the police side, everything was too simple. On the other side, Mademoiselle Berthe's side, it was far too complicated. Nearby, there was a small restaurant for drivers with 2 tables on a terrace. Since one was free, he sat down and discovered one of his favorite dishes on the menu, fricandeau with sorrel. The air smelled so strongly of spring, and the gusts of wind were so warm and fragrant that, aided by a glass of Beaujolais, the blood rushed to his head. He felt a sudden desire to lie down in the grass and cover his face with a newspaper. At 2 o'clock, Maigret went to the Hotel Concarneau and, not without some difficulty, secured a room on the 5th floor. Its windows looked out over the street directly at Mademoiselle Berthe's balcony. As he approached the window, he nearly blushed. The girl was fitting a dress for a client who stood half-dressed in the bluish twilight of the room. He wondered for a moment if she were doing it on purpose, if she had even spotted him in the window. But then, didn't the warmth of the day explain perfectly why the girl had left her window wide open? Maigret kept his eyes on her, so to speak, and there was nothing unnatural in his posture. Having finished the fitting for her first client, she turned her patient attention to a blue dress. She pulled pins from her mouth one by one, spending long moments on her knees before a mannequin draped in black cloth. Later, she poured herself a glass of water, sat at the machine, and looked up as a knock came at the door. She received a second client who had brought a length of fabric. From his vantage point, Maigret could almost guess the words by the movement of her lips. He gathered they were haggling over the price, and that, in the end, the client had given in. It was only around 4 o'clock that Maigret thought to warn his wife that he would not be returning home that evening, nor, perhaps, for several days to come. He called the maid, dictated a telegram, and took the opportunity to order a bottle of beer. The brie cheese he had eaten with his fricandeau had left him parched. Either this girl has a tremendous will, he muttered to himself from time to time, gnawing on his pipe, or else what? Why had he taken on this grueling labor? Why hadn't he caught the 11 o'clock train? Why had he ignored the fleeting impulse to do just that? Suppose she was telling the truth. All the circumstances suggested she was. Very well. If that were the case, what was he supposed to do? Play the guardian angel? Imitate those private American eyes who tail nannies and children to protect them from gangsters? This could go on forever. Albert seemed in no hurry to return to Paris to kill his mistress, and Maigret suddenly realized he didn't even know what the man looked like. And what if it were a lie? Why call for his help then? Why drag him to this petty bourgeois corner of Paris when he was living so peacefully in the provinces? He left his heavy coat in his room, went downstairs, and stopped by the concierge's lodge at number 67A. Is Mademoiselle Berthe in? Of course. I even do her shopping for her. She's so swamped with work. Would you be so kind as to take this letter up to her, since you're going that way? He recognized Albert's handwriting and saw the stamp with the Boulogne postmark. So, he grumbled as he climbed the stairs, answering the very doubt he had just entertained. He knocked. He had to wait a moment on the landing. When the door opened, he was ushered into the kitchen, as yet another client was inside for a fitting. The kitchen was as spotless as the rest of the apartment. In the corner sat the half-finished bottle of white Bordeaux and a used plate. Through the door, he heard, a bit more taken in at the waist. Yes, like that. It always makes one look younger. When will it be ready? Next Monday. Could you not make it sooner? I wish I could, but I simply can't. Every client is in a rush this season. Finally, Mademoiselle Berthe released him with a weary smile. You see, she said, I'm doing the impossible to keep up appearances. Life must go on, regardless. But you know how frightened I am, or rather, how frightened I was, for since you've been nearby, I have a letter for you. From whom? He handed it to her. She read it, her lips trembling, then handed it back. My old girl, my ears are beginning to burn. I'm warning you, my patience is at its limit. I don't dare stay in Calais forever. They'll catch me eventually. I'm constantly on the move. Today I lunched in Boulogne, and I still don't know where I'll sleep tonight. But I know this. If you don't come, I will do what I promised and let them nab me. The choice is yours. Albert, you see, she said despairingly. What does your brother think of this? She didn't flinch or show surprise. She only looked sadder. He spoke with you? We had an apéritif together. It would have been better if I'd told you everything this morning. It's not that he's truly wicked, but he's been left to his own devices since he was young. He wants to act the Apache, but he wouldn't hurt a fly. Still, I had to forbid him from coming here because of the way he carries himself. And yet, you lied to me this morning. I was afraid of what you might think. What, for example? I don't know. That we were two of a kind. Perhaps you would have refused to help me. She pointed to the letter. You read it. It was sent yesterday. There's no proof he hasn't boarded a train since then. A chill began to descend as the sun dipped behind the buildings. Mademoiselle Berthe closed the balcony door and turned to Maigret. Would you like some tea? No. As you see, I am working. I have always worked alone to make a place for myself. When I met Albert, I thought happiness had finally arrived. She suppressed a sob, mechanically smoothing the scraps of fabric lying in disarray. Do you have a girlfriend? He asked, examining the photograph of a young blonde on the mantelpiece. She followed his gaze. I was friends with Madeline, but she got married. You don't see her anymore. She lives in the provinces. Her husband is quite a big shot. For me, Albert was... Could you give me a photograph of him? She didn't hesitate for a second. That's true. You wouldn't recognize him if you saw him, she remarked. One moment. I have a photo taken in St. Malo, on the beach. She pulled it from the soup tureen that evidently served as her strongbox. It was a small snapshot, the kind usually taken at the seaside. Albert, in white trousers, arms bare, a linen cap on his head, looked like every other young man one might meet on the coast. As for Mademoiselle Berthe, she was clinging to him, as if afraid her happiness might slip away. It's getting dark, isn't it? As soon as the sun goes down, the apartment becomes so dim. I'll turn on the light. Hardly had she touched the switch when there was a knock at the door. It was the concierge bringing a basket of groceries. Here you are, Mademoiselle Berthe. Put it all in the kitchen, Madame Morin. The salad is quite delightful. But as for the Swiss cheese, I was forced to... See you soon. When they were alone again, she sat down, threaded a needle, and put on her thimble. And what did they say to you at the police station? I hope you didn't tell them about the letter. He took his time answering, and she looked up, speaking more rapidly. Forgive me, but I don't quite know how these things work. When I wrote to you, I assumed that since I called for you, you are something like a lawyer, are you not? What do you mean by that? Professional secrecy. I've told you everything. I've shown you the letters. Oh, I wouldn't care if you were arrested. In fact, it would be a relief. But I don't want them to think I was an accomplice. And above all, I don't want him to come back here to kill me. It's the only way I'll ever have peace. But I don't want it to happen because of me. So if they're looking for him now in Calais and Boulogne, Maigret offered her no help. She, no longer knowing how to talk her way out of it, began basting the hem of a dress with excessive zeal. Which would you prefer? Maigret asked slowly. I beg your pardon? For him to be arrested, or for him to cross the border? She looked at him calmly, her eyes radiating trust. And what do you think? What will happen to him if he's caught? What is he actually facing? If it's proven, well, if he was the one who fired the shot, he faces the guillotine as a matter of course. She turned away, biting her lip. Then, I prefer he crossed the border, even though I know that one day he'll come back for me. And if I refuse to go with him, Maigret held the photograph of the two lovers. He studied the young man's face with particular attention, a rather ordinary face framed by curly hair. Doubtless, you haven't written to him yourself. How could I, when I don't have an address? And what could I possibly say to him? It was difficult to imagine a tragedy was about to erupt. The atmosphere was simply too peaceful. Maigret could easily have imagined he was at home with Madame Maigret while she darned socks or sewed. There was the same stillness, the same soft, diffused light, the same sense of order and cleanliness. The only difference was that Mademoiselle Berthe was younger, prettier, and dressed with a certain tasteful coquetry. Did he ever spend the night here? He asked, merely to break the silence. She answered with a piquant naivety, not a single night. Because of the concierge and the neighbors. There's an old couple next door who are obsessed with propriety, and a young woman on the third floor who had a lot of visitors. They wrote to the landlord until he evicted her. She suddenly remembered her role as hostess. Are you sure you won't have anything? What do you usually drink? Nothing, I assure you. I'm beginning to think your fears are groundless. He began to pace, just as he used to do during interrogations in his office at the Quai d'Orfèvres. He touched things mechanically, fiddling with objects, playing with the pins in the porcelain cup, and shifting the soup tureen to the very center of the sideboard. In my opinion, once he realizes there's no hope left, he'll try to cross the Belgian border, and that will be the end of it. Do you think he'll make it? Hard to say. Obviously, every customs officer and policeman has his description, but he might take a smuggler's path. Is that easy? On the contrary, I imagine it's very difficult, as there's a great deal of tobacco smuggling in that sector. Come now, admit that you love him still. No, and yet, you'll weep if you hear of his arrest. But that's only natural. It's been 10 months since. A long-standing connection, of course, he sighed with a touch of emotion. And now, I'll leave you. Already. Don't be afraid. I'm right nearby, just across the street, on the 5th floor of the Hotel Concarneau. I must confess, I've seen your clients in their slips, and even one without a slip at all. I didn't know. He shook Mademoiselle Berthe's soft, damp hand. I trust you, she whispered with a hint of sadness. This will be the first night I'll sleep in peace. On the narrow staircase, Maigret felt like a clumsy giant. Out on the street, where the light had not yet faded, he nearly collided with baby Louis. The youth mockingly touched the brim of his light gray felt hat and quipped, "My apologies, Monsieur Commissioner." Maigret's mood soured instantly. He felt as though a bucket of filth had been dumped over him. He wanted to finish this business once and for all, and more importantly, to escape the ridiculous situation he'd landed in. Well, look at that. It's you. Fancy a rematch at bone poker? I'm at your service. And what would you say to a little trip to the Quai or Fevre's? That's simple enough. Is it? Simple or not, I want you to follow me there and answer a few questions for Inspector Lacroix. Baby Louis was far from thrilled. Are we taking the metro? We're taking a taxi. Maigret had never been involved in a case so farcical. He thought that if Madame Maigret had seen him in Berthe's apartment a few minutes ago, she would have found it hard to believe he was there on official business. He hardly believed it himself. Get in. To the Quai or Fevre's. Yes, the office. Let Jerome wring a confession out of this disrespectful brat. Then they would see where the matter led. As for Mademoiselle Berthe, it was hard to believe she was in any real danger, given that Albert was still drifting between Calais and Boulogne. You know the way. Right now. Last office at the end of the corridor. It was the same office Maigret had occupied at the very start of his career, back when the building had no electricity. Wait a moment. Jerome was busy drafting a report. Would you like to put this young scamp through a proper interrogation? He knows far more than he's letting on. Of course, Uncle. The scamp, as usual, was putting on airs, pointedly refusing to take off his hat. He had the nerve to light a cigarette, but Maigret snatched it right out of his mouth. Listen, kid, don't you want to tell me where you were the night they robbed the shop on Boulevard Beaumarchais? Which night was that? Monday night into Tuesday. Which month? He was playing the fool. Maigret almost regretted the time it would take to teach him some respect. Where was I? Let's see. They must have been showing Marlene Dietrich at the cinema on Rue Caulaincourt. And then there was a cartoon and a thing about plants that grow on the seabed. Jerome had the patience to carry out an interrogation for hours on end. Maigret, however, was fed up. Were you pleased with it? With what? The thing. Which thing? One more second, and the ex-commissioner would have punched baby Louis in the face. But Maigret checked himself in time. Do you have an alibi? A good one. I was asleep. Were you at the cinema, or were you asleep? First I was at the cinema, then I was asleep. Maigret had dealt with tougher types than this, but he had no legal authority now, and his nephew didn't look entirely convinced. Are you, by any chance, the fourth man they never found? The boy spat solemnly on the floor and declared, I swear on my life. At that exact moment, the telephone rang. Jerome picked up the receiver, his brows knitting together in a hard line. What's that you say? Are you certain? He set the receiver down and stood up, unsure of what to do with baby Louis. He left him in the office and drew Maigret out into the corridor. That was the duty officer, he whispered. They've just had a report of an attack on a woman. 5th floor, number 67A, Rue Caulaincourt. His uncle finished for him. Yes. The concierge claims she saw a man leaving the building, drenched in blood. The staircase is covered in it. What are we to do with him? Jerome, whose reverence for official regulations was absolute, looked profoundly burdened. The presence of baby Louis, held there on such shaky legal ground, was now a weight he didn't know how to carry. Part 3. Jerome Lacroix could not contain himself. Every minute, he would turn to Maigret with an uncertain air and mutter, What do you make of it, uncle? The old commissioner would answer with a ghost of a smile at the corner of his mouth, making his words seem all the more cryptic. You know perfectly well, son, that I never make anything of it. He made himself as small as possible, sitting for long stretches in the corner of the room near the dressmaker's mannequin, smoking his pipe with an absent-minded expression. Nevertheless, His presence unsettled everyone. The local precinct commissioner, terrified of appearing clumsy in front of the illustrious Maigret, sought his approval at every turn. "If you were in my shoes, you would have done exactly the same, wouldn't you?" On the landings outside, people were huddling together. A municipal police sergeant struggled to keep the curious onlookers out of the apartment. Another sergeant, stationed at the building's entrance, repeated in vain, "I'm telling you, there's nothing to see." That evening, many residents of Rue Caulaincourt sacrificed their dinner just to keep watch from the street or their windows. Indeed, the weather was superb, and occasionally, moving silhouettes could be seen through the curtains of the fifth-floor apartment. An ambulance stood in the street, but about an hour later, to everyone's surprise, it drove off without the casualty. What do you think of that, Monsieur Maigret? A problem had arisen. Mademoiselle Berthe had regained consciousness and refused to go to the hospital. She was very weak, having lost a great deal of blood from a severe blow to the skull. But her gaze remained steady, and she resolutely clenched her sweaty hands. "That is for the doctor to decide," Maigret replied, unwilling to take any responsibility. Inspector Lacroix turned back to the physician. "Do you believe she can be left here?" "I think that once I've put in the stitches, the only thing left for her to do is sleep until tomorrow morning." As always, everything happened in a blur of commotion. But the injured girl's eyes remained fixed on Maigret, seemingly expressing a desperate plea. "Did you hear what the concierge said, uncle?" "Personally, I see it like this. Mademoiselle Berthe went downstairs, undoubtedly to do some shopping." "No," Maigret cut in softly. "You think not? Then why did she go down?" "To drop a letter in the mailbox." Jerome chose not to ask just then how Maigret could be so certain of such a detail. Regardless. On the contrary, it is very important. But go on. Hardly had she left the house when the concierge saw a man slip into the building. The hallway was dark. The concierge thought it was one of the tenant's friends. Mademoiselle Berthe returned almost immediately. "There is a mailbox 100 yards from here on the place Constantin Piqueur," Maigret specified, liking to his eyes for his own satisfaction. "Let's assume so." So, she returned and found a stranger in her rooms. He attacked her. She defended herself. A man was gravely wounded, judging by the blood trails. He fled down the stairs, and the concierge saw him running away, clutching both hands to his stomach. With a touch of frustration, Jerome looked around and added timidly, "The most annoying thing is that the weapon hasn't been found anywhere." "Weapons," Maigret corrected. "The blunt object that wounded Mademoiselle Berthe, and the weapon, likely a knife, that was used on the stranger. Perhaps he took them with him?" Jerome ventured. Maigret turned away to hide a smile. Orders had already been given to search the neighborhood for a wounded man. The doctor finished bandaging the girl's head. Despite the pain, she struggled to keep her eyes on Maigret. "Do you believe, uncle, that this man could have been her lover?" "Doing what?" "Coming here and attacking her." To which Maigret replied with unexpected certainty, "Of course not. What would you do in my place?" "Since I am not in your place, it's difficult for me to give you an answer." In his turn, the precinct commissioner decided to fish for a compliment. "Here is what I've decided. The doctor will send a nurse immediately to watch over the casualty. I will also leave a policeman downstairs. Tomorrow, we shall see if a formal statement can be taken." The girl heard his words. She was still looking at Maigret, and she thought she saw him give her a slight wink. Reassured, she finally surrendered to the drowsiness that was steadily overtaking her. The two men, uncle and nephew walked past the curious crowds still lingering near the neighboring houses. Maigret began tamping a fresh pipe. "How about a bite to eat?" he suggested. "If I'm not mistaken, we never did have dinner. There's a restaurant nearby, and I must confess to you that pork with sauerkraut and potatoes. Go on, call your wife." Throughout the meal, Jerome watched his uncle like a schoolboy afraid of being caught in some mischief. Little by little, his mood soured, giving way to a flicker of resentment toward Maigret, who sat there far too calm and far too self-assured. "One would think this whole business amuses you," he remarked, helping himself to a sausage. "It is indeed quite amusing. Perhaps it's amusing for someone who doesn't have to find the solution." Maigret ate with gusto, broad and heavy set. He drank his large mug of beer with such visible pleasure he could have been an advertisement for the brewery. Wiping his mouth, he allowed himself the malicious joy of mentioning in passing, "I've found it." "What?" "The solution. You know who attacked Mademoiselle Berthe?" "No." "Well then, it's not important. I mean to say, it isn't really important for her, nor for me." Jerome's face lengthened further. Had it not been for the respect he bore Maigret, he would have flown into a rage. "Thank you," he grumbled anyway, staring into his plate. "For what?" "For making fun of me instead of helping. If you've truly discovered something." But he tried in vain to rouse his uncle. Maigret had resumed his air of total indifference. He ordered a second helping of pork, another pair of frankfurters, and a third mug of beer. "But you believe I did everything I ought to have done? You did everything you felt was necessary, didn't you? There's a nurse in her room." "Yes." "A policeman at the door." "Good heavens! What do you mean by that?" "Nothing." Maigret paid the bill and declined his nephew's offer of a cup of coffee at his home. Half an hour later, he was standing once again by the window of the Hotel Concarneau. Across the street, he could see the dimly lit curtain of Mademoiselle Berthe's room. He made out the silhouette of the nurse, reading comfortably in an armchair. Below on the pavement, the policeman paced back and forth, checking his watch every 15 minutes. "Let her rest." Maigret grunted, closing the window. He sat on the bed and began to pull off his boots. Thinking of his nephew, he added, "And let him do his job." The sun was flooding the room when he approached Mademoiselle Berthe's bed. It was 9 o'clock in the morning. The nurse was tidying up. "I've come to say goodbye," he announced, putting on a deliberately innocent air. "Now that this cursed Albert has been defeated, I imagine you're no longer in any danger." At once, he read an anxiety bordering on terror in the eyes of the wounded girl. Shiva tried to sit up to see where the nurse was at that moment. "Don't leave," she whispered. "I beg of you. Do you truly want me to stay?" "Yes." "And you aren't afraid, for example, that I might give a few tips to my poor nephew, who has no idea which saint to pray to for help?" That morning, there was a mixture of something stern and something fatherly in his manner. He could see clearly that Mademoiselle Berthe was wavering between a smile and a sob. She watched him closely. She had run a fever the night before, and she wondered if she had misread him. The presence of the nurse made things even more complicated, as the girl could not speak as she wished. "By the way," Maigret asked, "you didn't receive a letter today, did you?" She shook her head, and he spoke with absolute confidence. "You'll get it tomorrow?" "Oh, certainly. Postmarked Calais or Boulogne. I'll even tell you more. There'll be 2 tiny pinholes pricked in the stamp." He was smiling. Bathed in sunlight, he began to play, just as he had the day before, with the porcelain cup containing the pins, buttons, and stamps. He didn't need to say another word. Mademoiselle Berthe understood everything and blushed. Once again, she looked for the nurse, for it was she whom the girl feared. But a look from Maigret assured her the woman was in the kitchen, where the hiss of the gas stove could be heard. "Do you know who lives next door?" he asked, abruptly changing the subject. "You told me about an elderly couple, didn't you? Do they have a servant?" "No. The wife does the housework herself." "And she goes shopping herself?" "Yes. Every morning around 9 or 10. I know she goes to the market on Rue Lepic because I've run into her there several times." "And the husband?" "He leaves at the same time and spends the whole morning browsing the second-hand bookstalls on Boulevard Roquecourt." "So, the apartment is empty," Maigret concluded, for some reason raising his voice. Once again, the wounded girl didn't know whether to laugh or cry. She kept asking herself if Maigret was on her side or against her. She didn't dare speak. "Just imagine," he continued, good-naturedly but still loudly, "that they've left a policeman in the street. Do you know what his orders are?" He acted as if he weren't even addressing Mademoiselle Berthe. He even turned his back on her. "He's there to stop you from leaving the apartment, should such a whim enter your head, and to stop your enemies from entering. I say entering. Pay attention to that. The police are actually afraid that someone might come and finish you off right in your bed." With those words, he flung the window wide open, knocked his pipe against his heel, and began to pack it with tobacco. A silence fell. One might have thought the girl, like the commissioner, was waiting for something. Maigret paced nervously on the balcony, then leaned over the railing to get a better view of the street, shrugging his shoulders like a man losing his patience. Eventually, he hissed through his teeth, "What a moron!" Suddenly, he froze, staring down at the street. Mademoiselle Berthe was ready to jump out of bed at any moment, despite her weakness. The nurse watched them both, wondering what on earth this could mean. She was half convinced they were both a little mad. Still, the metro is right at the corner. Maigret sighed. "And the bus stop is 50 yards away. Besides, there are taxis cruising for fares. And then what?" This time, Mademoiselle Berthe could not help herself. She asked, "Is he gone?" And he replied morosely, "At any rate, he's trying his best. One would think he was tied down with an elastic band." In short, the bus, the metro. Maigret returned to the room, went into the kitchen to fetch the bottle of white wine, and sighed as he poured himself a glass. If only it were dry, to boot. Mademoiselle Berthe was weeping uncontrollably. She was crying burning tears, as they say, and the nurse tried to comfort her. "Calm yourself, mademoiselle. You'll make yourself ill. I assure you, your wound isn't dangerous. There's no need to be sad." "Daft woman," Maigret grumbled, for that goose of a nurse hadn't realized that the tears flowing from Mademoiselle Berthe's eyes were tears of frantic joy, while a stray sunbeam danced upon her sheets. Part 4. When the doctor arrived, Maigret took his hat and left without a word. But he did not leave the neighborhood. Carefree as a common loafer, he stepped into the Zanzibar, where shortly afterward he watched his nephew march off to conduct a rigorous interrogation of Mademoiselle Berthe. Suddenly, baby Louis appeared. Seeing the commissioner, he tried to bolt, but Maigret called out to him first. "I've come for a rematch. Give us the dice, landlord. An anisette for the gentleman." "It is anisette, isn't it, baby Louis? Your lead. 3 queens on the first roll. I suspect that won't be enough. What did I tell you? 3 kings. Pass me a match." Then, without transition, he leaned toward his partner, who was struggling to maintain his composure. "Was the money in the soup tureen?" Baby Louis shook his head. "Did Albert pocket it?" Again, Baby Louis shook his head, more vigorously this time, before confessing. While he was making his getaway, he ran along the quays and threw the money into the Seine. Are you sure? I swear it. Then why did someone come here yesterday? Because he didn't believe me. Maigret smiled. It was a truly unique moment. Not just because it was spring or because the sun turned Rue Caulaincourt into a brilliant stage or because the beer was cold, but because a single word had set his mind at rest. He felt such relief that he found himself almost troubled by the fear he had felt only a short time before. Now he could act openly. He held all the trumps. Who fired the shot? The man from Marseille? Albert had handed over his revolver to him. Maigret let out a laugh as he watched his nephew emerge from number 67A with a grim expression and head for the bus stop just a few yards from the Zanzibar. What are you going to do? Baby Louis asked anxiously, still clutching the dice cup. Me? I'm going to say goodbye to your sister and catch my train. The bus rattled past, carrying Jerome Lacroix away. Maigret crossed the street and, on the 5th floor, encountered the nurse packing her things. My help is no longer required, she announced. The doctor will visit daily, and the concierge will check in on her. A merry glint sparked in Maigret's eyes. He paced the room as if he were in his own home, waiting for the nurse to depart. Rarely had an investigation brought him such satisfaction. Yet it was a case of a petty crook, a story he could never repeat to anyone. He remembered his first reaction to Mademoiselle Berthe's letter back in Mung-sur-Loire. Strange, he remarked to himself. One might say it was both sincere and insincere at the same time. The girl in the red hat who had met him at the Café de Madrid had left the same impression. She had been genuinely afraid. That much was clear. But it was equally clear she was lying about the fear her lover inspired in her. She hadn't been able to utter Albert's name with the required bitterness. Against her will, her voice had sounded too tender, too soft. Why then had this determined creature dared to disturb the rural peace of a retired commissioner? And why had she shown the letters postmarked Boulogne and Calais to him, and not to the police? He hadn't understood it at first. He had understood even less as he watched her through the window for hours, calmly fitting dresses like a woman with nothing to fear. The stamps in the porcelain cup had given him the idea, and he had pricked them with a pin. Why are you smiling, Monsieur Commissioner? And you? They were alone now. The nurse was gone. The muffled noise of the street reached them along with the smell of overheated asphalt, the scent that signals the arrival of summer in Paris. Maigret tried to strike a stern pose, using his most formidable voice. Do you realize that if those 60,000 francs had been here, or if Albert had been the one to shoot, I would have seen you in prison? But you were working for me, as they say. Precisely. That is what I eventually understood. I realized you didn't call me to protect you from Albert, but to protect Albert himself. If you had loved him just a little bit less, I would have smoked him out of his hiding place last night. I don't see what my love has to do with it, she murmured, blushing. Perhaps you don't, but it is so. I reason it out. Here is a determined young woman who strikes me as fundamentally honest. She is trying to save a young man who has made a mess of things. She is driven by love. Therefore, I am convinced that if this boy had truly been a murderer, he would have filled her with nothing but loathing. He swore on my life that he wasn't the one who fired Monsieur Commissioner. Besides, it was partly my fault. I knew he was seeing my brother, and my brother kept bad company. Albert couldn't find work in Paris and was desperate to marry me. That's why he was so easily led astray. The others, whom I don't even care to know, left him to stand lookout. One of them asked for Albert's revolver, just in case. When the police appeared, they all fled, leaving the gun at the scene, and they shoved the money at Albert as they ran. I know. He came here at 3 in the morning, pale as a ghost, and confessed everything. He assured me he had thrown the money into the Seine. He begged me to hide him. I know. How did you guess where he was? First, I made sure the building had neither a cellar nor an attic. Then I noticed that while talking to me, you occasionally raise your voice, as if you wanted someone else to hear. There used to be only one apartment on this floor. What was split into 2, the connecting door was kept, but doubled. Thus, there's a door on each side of the wall, and between them, a space. Albert was hiding in there. Only I was certain that the police, who had already come once, would search the house again. I didn't know if the building was being watched. To find out, you turned to me, knowing I would keep you informed of the official investigation. I served as your screen. I diverted suspicion away from your apartment, while simultaneously keeping you briefed. That is what I realized. But really, it's beyond all limits. Oh, Monsieur Commissioner, she whispered shyly. Albert had to be saved, didn't he? His accomplices would never have told the truth. They claimed he would have to face the music alone, and they were convinced we had the money. My brother told me so. Your brother, who was trying to protect you. Yesterday evening, you went out to mail a double letter to your friend in Boulogne. He pointed to the portrait of the girl. This Madeline was tasked with mailing back the threatening letters. Meanwhile, an accomplice took advantage of your absence to break into your apartment to search for the money. You returned, and he struck you with a club. Albert leaped from his hiding place and set upon him with a knife. Am I right? He had known it all along. He also knew that Albert had taken both weapons back into his hiding place with him. I'll bet they're still lying there, he grunted. He pulled open the communicating door, and there they were, a rubber truncheon and a knife stained with blood. Where are you supposed to meet him? He asked, looking around for his hat. She hesitated, then whispered, Must I tell you? I want to be certain that. At that, he let out a hearty laugh. That I won't have you both arrested at the border? Is that what you're trying to find out? No, but you love your Albert quite a bit, don't you? So much, so that the mere thought of another woman being able to. He stood by the door, his hand turning the knob. At heart, you're a jealous woman. Bravo, Mademoiselle Berthe. You're even jealous of me, in a way, because you wanted to save him all on your own. In that case, I give you leave, the moment I turn my back, to get up, despite your injury, and catch the train to Brussels. I'll even bet that a shop called Parisian Models will be opening there very soon. Goodbye, Mademoiselle Berthe. And in spite of everything, yielding to a small desire for revenge, he tossed over his shoulder as he left. I'll be sending you my bill.